What are we doing here? Welcome. This is Her Talk Show. My name is Sabrina Victoria. Thank you so much for being here. We have Diane with us today, and she is going to be sharing with us on the topic of your voice and your story and your power. This is everything that I talk to my community about. The story that you're trying to shove into the closet is so much more powerful than you're believing it is. So get comfortable as we explore the triumphs, the challenges faced by women worldwide. Diane is going to be offering some insights, some inspiration to fuel your personal and professional growth. We're going to be telling some stories. We're going to be digging deep. We're going to be having some fun. So let's jump in.
Get ready, because today's guest is about to change the way you view your world. This is Her Talk Show, hosted by Sabrina Victoria.
Oh, if you're listening live, welcome. And if you're listening on the replay, make sure you hashtag replay wherever you're at so we can send you some love in the comments. We are here every day delving deep into the realms of health, wealth, and leadership with some of the most brilliant women globally. We've interviewed over 600 women. I think we need to change that to like 700 now. I need to count that. And today we are adding another one to the list. For 30 years, Diane helped professionals take their story from a message only they could hear to the courtroom, boardroom meetings, keynotes, and airwaves. Today, as the principal story consultant at Quarter Moon Story Arts, I love that name. Diane mentors women to grow in confident self-expression, communication skills, and powerful origin story voices for visibility, credibility, and influence. Diane is also the voice behind Stories from Women Who Walk, a long-running global podcast. Welcome, lady.
Thank you, Sabrina. I am delighted to be here.
Yes, girl. So excited. Look at us both having our podcast areas set up all legit. Girl, we're ready to roll.
Mm-hmm.
I love this. So, first of all, before we jump into this, I love what we're going to be talking about today. And I lean fully 100% into the power of our story. But I would love to know, how did you end up here? How did you come to recognize that our stories are so powerful?
Oh gosh. Let's see. You know what? Come on over for dinner. We'll have a glass of wine and I can give you the whole thing. The short form, the short form. So when I grew up, like probably many of your listeners, we were not encouraged. We might have had our stories suppressed, oppressed. They didn't really matter much, but for whatever reason, we were not encouraged to go, hey, yay, Rob, this is who I am, and this is what my story is, and it matters to be heard. And that's how I grew up. And I also was in different professions where the men were in charge. So if you're a nurse, doctors are in charge, and if you're a lawyer, like men lawyers are in charge. But be that as it may, we all come from a place where we feel, partly it's culture, partly it's gender, that what we have to say and how we say it and why we say it is not as important as the other person. And that's how I pretty much grew up. It wasn't until I got into law school, believe it or not. And in law school, you can either be, if you're a high achiever, you can be writing a law review, or you can go into moot court, which requires you to do a lot of on your feet arguing in front of panels of other lawyers, judges, and whatnot. And there I was rewarded. I had people telling me, I had other lawyers and judges saying, I could listen to you read the Manhattan phone book. So what that meant is that I had a good voice to listen to, but also I had an ability to think on my feet. I don't know where it came from, but I did. And so at that time, I thought, you know what? There's something to what I've got. And I was able to build that as I was practicing law. But then there came a huge backslide because my husband left after a big affair and all kinds of other things. And I found myself sort of in that desert where I wanted to just build a brick house and a little picket fence and stay there. And another woman said, mm-mm, ain't gonna happen. You're walking through. And at that time, then I decided, okay, story is where I want to go. And I want to work with lawyers, and I want to work with the lawyers who are on the bright side for plaintiffs, the damaged, the injured
Okay.
people. And in the course of that, teaching lawyers, teaching in university, the power of story that I was aware of really came to life. Then I got to see, wow, there is something about narrative that we are wired about. We are, it's in our DNA, it's in our bones. Story is organic, it's alive, it
Yeah.
will follow you home, it'll sleep in your bed. And so over time, and that's really what it was, over time and encouragement, I said, okay, this is the place. This is where an Aquarian belongs.
That's awesome. So I'd love to ask, I think one of the biggest things is like, how can my story help? How can me sharing my story help? How does it help me? How does it help the world? How does it help my community? So you said you specifically went to lawyers, the good lawyers.
Mhm.
How did teaching them specifically about storytelling help them and or their work, their profession, their community?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Lawyers, for the most part, think analytically, linearly. They don't necessarily tap into their right brain creativity part of it. So, first of all, you're teaching them how to access something that is inherent in them, the ability to tell a story, and to remove lawyer man or lawyer woman hat, where it was give me the facts and only the facts. And I could do that because I was a lawyer and I could speak from that place. So, number one, you're shifting their attitudes and their behaviors around the power of narrative to do good. That's thing number one. And that's in their work. Thing number two is, and this always happened, it influenced their lives. So I had, there's a line that I use about doing an archaeological dig on your story to get back to the origins of where you came from. And that came from one of my clients who said, working with you is like doing an archaeological dig on myself. So, humanly and professionally, they are changing and they're able to listen out the stories of what happened to their clients. And those stories are difficult to tell. I mean, if you can imagine how hard it is to talk about loss and disfigurement and death and fill in the blank. And so they were able to better listen out the story of the people who had been hurt by the negligence of others. And in addition to that, when you go to trial, there is no telling what's going to happen. You could win, you could lose, no way to know. It's a crapshoot. But by having the chance to tell your story, it doesn't make losing any better, but at least you've been heard.
Mm.
And once that person has been heard, they take that back into their family, they take that back into their community. And that story then can be shared with others. So if you have a mother who has a brain damaged child because of things that were not paid attention to during the labor and delivery process, she can go back into the community and say, I have this special needs child, and this is how it happened. But there is a way out of this place. And if
Mm.
you can work with me and I can work with you, then we're building a community of women who have a similar situation and then can help each other. So
Wow.
from the very beginning, it cuts all the way through.
Wow.
Hmm.
Super, super powerful. I love the niche of that. I love the how small that is. Just kind of like a side note there. Because we're told a lot of times as business people, we're supposed to niche. You like niched, niched, niched. Do you still work with lawyer plaintiffs, or who do you work with now?
I work with women lawyers, and I prefer the
Nice.
plaintiff side just because they're on the side of the people who have been hurt. And surprisingly, you would think, you go through law school and you do all that stuff, but still, I find that women lawyers, especially the young women that have gone from college right into law school,
Mhm.
have a difficult time standing up and facing off to a judge, standing up in a courtroom and saying what they have to say, and the way they say it, and how they say it, and being in their confident skin to say,
Mm.
I belong here. I have something to do. I have a job to do. And it has to do with me telling you a story about something that happened to someone else. And we have to do something about that. We have to do something about what happened.
Mm.
So there's a great deal of empowerment that comes from just being able to stand there on your own 2 feet and say, this is what I know. This is what I'll stand for. This is what I won't stand for.
Mm. Definitely feel that as far as the power goes. As far as speaking to a larger crowd, right? We have people listening live right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, where would you suggest people start telling their story? Where can people kind of start tippy toeing into something like this where they're learning or playing with the idea? Should this be done in a closet somewhere, in front of the mirror, in front of church, their spouse?
There's a lot of really good opportunities. I would say that so think about your story as a baby, and you're not going to bring your baby out into the wide, wide world just, butt naked and say, here, because anybody can say, oh, that's the ugliest looking kid I ever saw. And so you don't want to do that. But what you'd like to do is choose a setting or choose a person that is going to say, that is a gosh darn beautiful baby. And sometimes it means just sitting down with your own story and starting to sketch it out. You can draw it out,
Mm.
speak it out. You can go walking around the block and talk it out because everybody thinks that everybody has a Bluetooth, so you don't come across as if you're crazy.
Yeah.
If there's a small group, say in your church, a small group of women that are exchanging stories about X, you can start it there. And the place to start might be take a look at your values. What are the 3 most important values that you have? What are the values that run like a river under your life, that give shape to who you are and how you do what you do? And start to speak from the place of your values. I can say mine are adventure, justice, and self-expression. And once we have a handle on our values, we can say, oh, that kind of helps define who I am. And it gives expression to my why, what I do in the world and how can I do it. And most importantly, how you do it. So how you do your podcast is unlike anybody else in the world. It's as singular as your fingerprint.
Absolutely.
So that's a place to start.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I love that analogy of like
Okay.
a naked baby just being thrown out in the streets.
Oh,
Yeah, that's great though. And that is how it feels. It feels very vulnerable. It feels very, you know, when you first start telling your story.
it
But
does.
then the more, one of the biggest aha moments that I had as far as storytelling was Landmark Forum. Did you ever take Landmark Forum?
Yes, I did. Oh,
Yeah, so
I
the
did.
yeah, the just I took like 3 I took the Landmark Forum, the Advanced, and then Communications. It was like 3. It's a lot of money. Anyways, but I got a lot out of it. But one of the biggest things that I got from that, besides like so much, was storytelling. And the reason why was because it's very actionable. One of the things I love about Landmark is very actionable. They have you like actually doing things, like calling people and having tough conversations. So, anyways, went home, came back, and the first thing the teacher opened with, like day 2 or something, was like, how did the phone calls go? Share something. Nobody rose our hands. And it's a big deal because there's a lot of people in the room, at least for
Yeah,
us. There was probably about
yeah.
75 of us. and nobody rose their hands. And he was like, why is no one raising their hands? Did nobody do the assignment? We're all like, no, we did the assignment. He's like, why isn't anyone raising their hands? I was sitting in the front because I'm a total brown noser. And under my breath, I said, because no one feels like their story is significant enough. Because we had already heard so many stories just in general of like rape and like incest and, getting beat up and, just people are sharing just stuff, their lives.
Yeah.
And so he goes, excuse me. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. That's like the last thing I want to do. He goes, stand up. I stand up. I'm all freaking nervous. This was like way before I am who I am now, right? Like way before I like was in this identity that I'm in now. I was very victim, dark, small, little, weak back then. So I'm so nervous. And he goes, what did you say? And I said it out loud. And he goes, share your conversation that you had with whoever. Share yours. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so dumb. And I don't really even remember what the story was, but what I do remember is he, after I shared my story, and I'm kind of getting emotional, he turned to the audience and he said, who here 100% related to her story? And like 50% of the audience like shot their hands up. He said, turn around. So I'm facing, because I was in the front. He's like, right now, who here totally 100% resonated and felt that story and it helped them? And like 50% of the audience shot their hand up. And he said, exactly. That is why we have to share. And I didn't know back then, right? I was not a podcast. I wasn't on social media. I didn't have a business, nothing. But that has stayed with me throughout, which is exactly what you're saying.
I believe it. And because we have stories.
Yeah.
We have stories. We don't just have one story.
Yeah.
And when I talk about our origin story, I talk about the story of how we got from there to here. And that's a story that women might often tell, whether they're in front of a group or in a corporate setting or trying to get some traction in something. That story, how did I get from there to here? That's a common story and one we can easily put together. But there are so many other stories like this. They're large and they're small, and it doesn't have to mean that we climbed Mount Everest, with one hand tied behind our back and one foot in a bunny slipper.
Yeah.
These little moments in life that say, I'm like you and you are like me. How can we understand each other better? And what you're also bringing up is this idea that narrative, which is what joins us, can build communities as well as tear them down. And so we've just gone through a pretty big exercise in that. And so the question becomes, what narratives are no longer serving us? What are the things that we've been saying out of habit or out of patterning or out of belief that fit us about as well as our ninth grade school uniform did? And so what can we start to let go of so that we can sit and listen to others and ask them, how'd you arrive at that position? Tell me a little bit more about that. It doesn't mean we have to like each other. It doesn't mean we have to agree with each other, but it does mean that we have to do what you did. Share something about us from the heart, a heartfelt story, artfully told, that says, this is who I am. Who are you? How did we get here?
I really like what you're saying there. Tell me more about your position. It really is some really good safe space there.
I learned that when I was working as a litigation consultant, and I had a practice called Lightning Rod Communications, and that's when I did all my story work with lawyers. One of the things that I learned going through jury selection is that you don't want to say, do you agree or disagree? Because that becomes automatically confrontational. But if you can say, are you more like this or are you more like that? It gives people, like you said, a little bit of that wiggle room, and then they can find their way into the story. And if you also ask, how did you arrive at that position? Then you're asking them to fill in a bit of the story. You're not asking them to defend themselves, How'd
Mm.
you arrive at that position? Tell me more about that. What else can you say about that? That the hardest thing I have to learn, and I still have to learn it, is how to listen, because I'm the oldest of seven. So I am righteous, opinionated, judgmental. I am princess high and mighty, know-it-all, boss of the world. You know,
Do they all know it? That's great.
oh, are you kidding? Yeah, and I've got a big dart on my back too.
Oh, I
But
love
that's the
that.
hardest thing. That is the hardest thing. And I'm still learning. How do I sit on my tongue and listen to
Yeah.
something someone says? And that's part of story. That is
Yeah.
part of story.
I love that you're bringing it up. Yeah, because if no one's listening, you have to have two players in that. Somebody to
That's
listen
right.
and somebody to tell. It's interesting.
Actually, there's three.
Oh,
Got
tell
the
me.
teller, and you've got the listener, and you've got the story. So think of it as three connected circles. And right in the middle of the
Okay.
story, listener, and teller is where the actual act of storytelling takes place. Because if you don't have that, if I was just yammering on, as I am, we've got a monologue, the two of us, it's a dialogue. But the minute you brought in the story about your experience,
Landmark.
and the minute you brought that in, now you're bringing a story into the setting, and in that space is where the connection and the what's the word you use? Relatability. That's where that is happening.
Okay, so hang on. So I have story, listener.
And
You have
teller
the listener and the teller, and then the story.
and the
And then
story.
in the middle is what?
Yeah. So think of like the Olympic rings.
I
Think
have
of
it.
how
Yeah.
those work together. That's where to a traditional storyteller like myself, that's where the act of storytelling takes place, because you need to have a story to tell, you need to have somebody to tell it, and you need to have somebody to listen to it. So those are the components that interrelate. And then in the middle, you've got the traditional act of sharing story, which goes back as old as dirt.
That's great. I know that you talk a lot about how we can reconfigure the stories we tell to evolve from who we used to be.
Mm-hmm.
What does this mean?
Well, it's a deeper part of the subject. I think right now, perhaps many of us are examining. All right, I'm gonna talk about myself because that's the easiest. I have a tendency, my dark side, to be a little bit righteous, opinionated, and judgmental. I know it all. That's just me. That's the dark side part of me that is there, and I can feel it coming up. And like if I'm driving a car, oh man, that's stupid, or whatever. That's dumb. That's stupid. I wouldn't have done it that way. That attitude, that behavior, those patterns, those habits just came from before. It came from when we were growing up in our families, in our communities, in our schools, in our fill in the blank. How many times have we heard, don't do it because, let's see, do it because I said so,
Mm.
right? And and so the growth of a woman into her real womanliness, into her wisdom, into her experience, is facing some of those habits, patterns, behaviors, and saying, you know what? It doesn't do me any good, and it doesn't do the world that I'm working in any good either. How can I start to how can I start to pull back on those? How can I begin to reconfigure my beliefs about A, B, or C? Are
Mm.
we really that polarized in the world, or have systems created a sense that we are? So, this time in my life, at least, I feel that it is critical to begin to examine the stories I've been told and the stories that I've repeated, and
Mm.
then say, that doesn't work anymore. And then to take the wisdom of years and experience and say, how can I help the younger women coming up?
Mm.
How can I encourage them to use their voice, to believe in their power, to examine their story and say, you know what? This is worthy of me to say.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a follow-up question regarding this.
Mm-hmm.
What to do, because I know this is probably on a few people's minds here.
Mm-hmm.
What to do if your story
Mm-hmm.
involves somebody else, which is highly likely,
Mm-hmm.
and the story isn't necessarily a great story?
Okay, so for example, a husband who had a year-long affair with a hooker and then left. Is that the kind of story you're talking about?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
There you go. Theoretically. um, the first thing we're asking ourselves is what's the story we want to tell and how come we want to tell it?
Yeah, I love that.
And to whom do we want to tell it
Yeah.
and in what settings? So years ago, I used to tell, um, I used to talk about being an incest survivor. I don't tell that story anymore because part of Landmark was I got rid of that part of my story. But if you're going to tell a private story, a delicate story, one that might have some ramifications, that's the place to begin. What do I want to tell? How come I want to tell it? To whom do I want to tell it? Will I cause harm by sharing this story? Is this a story that needs to be told in public? Is this a story that I can write down on paper, put in an envelope, seal it up, and stick it at the back of a drawer? At least I'll have gotten it down.
Mm.
So I would go through those steps before just blurting out the story. And the other thing that's important here is if you're going to tell a difficult story, and that's what would come under the theme of all the difficult stories. If you're going to tell a difficult story, do your work first. Do your therapy work first. Do your figuring it out work first, because then you want to be in a position
Mm.
to share what you know
Yeah.
with people who need to hear it without them feeling like they have to reach out and catch you.
Wow.
And it's okay. I mean,
Absolutely.
I've told stories where, I'll get a catch in my voice. I have to repeat a couple words. It's okay to do that.
Yeah.
But if you're going to fall apart, you're not doing your audience any good at all. So do your work first on that story.
So good. Yeah. So good. Great advice. I do remember when I first started sharing my story, it was a mess.
Mm.
Ooh, so gross. Oh, it's so embarrassing. Ah, but
Yeah.
yeah, doing the work first. Landmark is a great place to start. We're doing a little plug for Landmark here.
There you go. There you go. And that was the place. I know I gave up the incest side of it. I had
Yeah.
gotten so tired of telling that
Yeah.
story. I finally said it was important. I no longer identify myself that way. And that's another aspect of telling the story, because you might be caught up as an actor on a stage telling a story that no longer needs to be told,
Yeah.
no longer needs to hold you back.
Yeah.
So letting go, that's part of the reconfiguring, letting go of that stuff,
Yeah.
whether it's victim or martyr, do your work, let
Yeah.
go.
I always kind of, in my head, joke a little bit about people who, because I talk to people all day long, networking
Mhm,
calls for my business
mhm,
and stuff. And
mhm.
I can always tell, I feel like I can tell when people have done the work
Yeah.
and have not done the work by how they tell their story.
And making,
How many details,
ah,
like when I tell my story, it's very just matter of fact, tell my whole story of just ridiculousness in like 6 sentences. Boom,
mhm,
boom, 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 boom. It's really fucked up dark story. I can tell
mhm,
in 6 sentences, and I can say it pretty emotionless, and just
mhm,
these are the facts. This is what happened. It was pretty messed up.
mhm.
Versus going on for 30 minutes about one incident, and taking me down and getting worked up. You can feel the vibration of the emotion coming through. And it's just like, oof, you know.
Because
So I'm just saying that's what Diane is talking about here. She's talking about the way that you're sharing your story. You know, are you vomiting all of this on somebody where now they're holding it and it's heavy? Or are you telling it in an inspirational way? You know, where you're actually inspiring people.
hmm keep in
Same
mind that
story. Go ahead.
it,
Sorry.
no, keeping in mind that story is always a gift
Yeah.
to the listener. And so you don't want to give somebody a bucket of puke. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
maybe some people you do, but you're
Yeah.
absolutely right, Sabrina. You want to give somebody, a pretty box, even though
Yeah.
it might have some difficult stuff in it. And that's the point. We're not trying to smooth it over. We're not trying to say this didn't happen. We're not trying to sanitize it.
Exactly.
But we want to present it in a way that says, this is what happened. This is how I dealt with it. And now this is how my story can be of use to the next person who finds themselves in a similar situation.
Absolutely. For sure. Well, this has been absolutely delightful. We're obviously getting a really good idea of what you do, but I'd love for you just to kind of give us a more kind of roundabout of what exactly you do. Like, what does it exactly look like, and who should be reaching out to you? Who exactly should be reaching out to you? So, what do you do exactly, and who should be reaching out to you?
What I do exactly is I help women lawyers, and professional women shape and share their story, their origin story. How did I get from there to here? And we've been talking about that, you and I together, sharing that, believe it or not, in little bits during this time. And that is, people call it coaching, but I don't. I say that I'm a story architect,
Mm.
and I like to bring a woman back to her origin story, much like we are, digging in a primitive place and looking for pottery shards and that, because I want to come back to, who were you when you were younger? What were the values? What was your character like? Who were you then? What has gotten forgotten? And how do we bring that authentic part of you forward? How can you use it? You can use it as an introduction in a keynote. You can use it as a whole keynote. You can use it in a corporate setting where you've got to say, this is who I am, and this is why I'm here, and this is how come you should be listening to me. It's also good for teaching the younger people. So I will work with women sorting out what their origin story is. How did you get from there to here? How do we shape it? And how do we share it? And each of those situations is different depending on the woman who says, it's my time now.
Mm.
I've got a reason to do this.
Yeah, that's great. As far as individuals that would like to reach out to you, follow you, where do you hang out on social media? Where can people find out more information about you?
Well, Quarter Moon Story Arts is my website, and you're always welcome to jump in there. It could use fine tuning because every little bit, every as time goes by, we change a little bit.
Yep.
So Quarter Moon Story Arts is there. There's lots of good stuff. You can reach out to me there. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel welcome to jump in, direct message me there. And also my long-running podcast, Stories from Women Who Walk, is now into what I call 60-second episodes, daily 60-second episodes. Probably got about 1,125 on the airwaves right now. So you can check it out there. It's on every platform going. There's also a Substack account called Wyzga on Words, where you can pick that up as well. So those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me. And
Love
I
it.
also offer an opportunity to just have a chat about your communication challenge. Let's see what we can do together.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great. I so appreciate you coming on and sharing so much. I took a ton of notes. For those of you listening live, for those of you listening on the replay, if you resonated with Diane and all the goodness that she shared today, make sure you check her out at quartermoonstoryarts.net. It is in a clickable link in the description below, wherever you are watching us at. And she predominantly hangs out on LinkedIn under Diane. What? I don't know how to pronounce your last name.
Oh, Wyzga.
Wyzga.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Substack, and the podcast.
I love it. Very cool. Well, this has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts as we start to wrap up here?
Yeah, you're not going to cross the ocean by standing on the shore. The only way to get from one side to the other is to wade out there and do it. And this time in our lives, more than any other time in history, your story matters, and I want to hear it, and others want to hear it. It's time. Go cross that ocean.
What a great visual for us. I totally felt that.
Oh, good.
Yes. Oh, I hope everyone else did. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for all the inspiration. To our dedicated listeners, thank you for staying with us into the very end. Remember, follow, like, and share these videos so we can reach the masses. Once again, my name is Sabrina Victoria. I help run a community called Her Nation Global. And when I say help, it's because we are a we community. We all work together to help lift each other up every step of the way by having conversations just like this one, actually. So, as I always say,